Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So I have several videos, or articles rather, uh, um, on this weed killer that is now found in pet food as well as cereal. So it's also in food that people eat, children eat, and the weed killing chemical is involved in Monsanto's lawsuit found in Cheerios and in other foods that kids eat. And it says News Roundup, more kids' foods with Monsanto's Roundup. And so there's several different articles on this poisonous weed killer. And so I have entitled it Monsanto Poison in Children's Food and Pet Food. And the list goes on. So it's not getting any better for these people who have put big money into this weed killer. Apparently, these rich tycoons who have invested in this company are now spending their money in court, for lawsuits that have been filed against them. And so this story is developing, I would say, and it just keeps going on and on and on. It never ends. So let's start with Monsanto's top weed killer, now found in pet food. So Monsanto's top weed killer now found in pet food as well as cereal. Okay. And so it just seems to get worse and worse and worse as time has gone by. And so you see pictured here, and this is out of Reuters, Mall Langston. So two new studies show how extensively Monsanto's best-selling herbicide, glyphosate is what it's called, has permeated our food chain, designated carcinogenic meaning cancerous by some health authorities. So it was found in over 40 pet foods and breakfast cereals. So outside of what's happening with that incident out in that city where people were complaining about a gas leak that could possibly be cancerous, which I believe it is, you also have the worry about Monsanto. For those of you that don't live in that city, everywhere, people that have talked about cancer and how it's happening so often and so frequent. If you don't got baby powder to worry about with Johnson and Johnson and them, having the baby powder and talc powder have some type of cancerous substance, we have Monsanto weed killer that has now gotten into the food. And people all these years have not really paid much attention to it until we've had people come out and sue these people. So including one product that was certified as a GMO free. So they stressed that the chemical was present in low concentrations, lower than those typically found in human food at least. So the glyphosate's effect on domestic animals in any concentration is unknown right now. And studies have found that human cells to show negative effects when exposed to levels of glyphosate-based herbicide far below these deemed safe by regulators. So it goes on to say they were unable to track the source of glyphosate, though a correlation with fiber suggested it was coming from a plant material. Interestingly, GMO-free products or product revealed glyphosate levels higher than many of the processed feeds. Mitigate the invasive effects of agricultural chemicals. And so someone once told me that a lot of times people will ride this wave of, sticking labels on packages and food saying that it's organic, and it actually has um, other things in it that you have to worry about. And so a lot of people think that if they buy something organic or that has an organic label on it, that it must be, you know, um, pesticide free and free of chemicals and what have you. And so this, however, is stating that there are foods that say they're GMO free, but reveal the glyphosate levels are higher than many of processed feeds. So it's basically the opposite. You're thinking you're doing something good and you're actually ingesting something that probably has more levels of this poisonous chemical. So a second study conducted by the Environmental Working Group, EWG, found glyphosate in every oat-based cereal and food tested. And so these things that are being planted out there, they're still spraying all of this stuff with these poisons and this toxic ingredient. And so worse, 26 of the 28 products tested contain higher levels of the weed killer than the EWG's Children's Health Benchmark. Products tested included Quaker and General Mills breakfast cereals, oats, oatmeals, snack bars, which a lot of parents will bring with kids to the schools. And, they're thinking, oh, we want our kids to eat healthy. And I know that, but, look at what we're dealing with here. And so the worst offender was Quaker oatmeal squares, whose honey nut flavor contained 18 times the levels of glyphosate EWG considers acceptable. The EWG study followed up on a study they published in August that revealed glyphosate in all but 2 of the 45 products made with non-organic oats, and even in a third of the organic oat products. So while manufacturers protested that the glyphosate levels were within Environmental Protection Agency, so that's what EPA is, regulatory limits, those limits were set prior to the World Health Organization in 2016 findings linking glyphosate to cancer. And so Bayer is in on this as well. So even the Food and Drug Administration, which is the FDA, finally released its own study last month, finding 2/3 of corn and soybean samples contain glyphosate, though the agency conspicuously neglected to test oat and wheat crops. Okay, so Bayer, Science for the Better Life. And so people are showing you what this chemical has done. There are a lot of people that are very upset behind this because they know that these chemicals have caused a lot of problems, and some people have seen the result of this. So last week, a California court upheld a ruling that found Monsanto responsible for groundskeeper Dwayne Johnson, this guy that I reported on, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which he developed shortly after being doused in the company's Roundup in an accident on the job. So the ruling opens up the agrochemical giant to thousands of more lawsuits from others who have experienced negative health exposure of this chemical, which is glyphosate. And so this has caused a lot of health problems with people. And so you see this person pictured here. Monsanto loses appeal on historic Roundup cancer verdict and owes $78 million. So they call it glyphosate. And because and you see there's this, devil symbol around the crops, because people, unsuspecting people, like any one of us could have bought these products and over time been using them thinking that it's safe. And so this is not our fault. This is a situation having to do with greedy people who have risked lives of people or feel that these people, oh, what, so what, too bad, so sad, we just want our money. And they have pretty much used this chemical to no end, to where people now are being affected by it health-wise, and they're paying the price for it as well in court. And so the next one here is, and that was in RT.com, which is the right.com. So the weed killing chemical involved in Monsanto lawsuit was found also in Cheerios and Quaker oat products. Here's how worried you should be. Okay, so I guess they want people to find out the verdict on all of this. So this is by Aria Bendix, 2018, October 24th. And so here you have Cheerios, which a lot of people will feed to little babies. A new finding that Cheerio Oats Crunch Cinnamon flavor was deemed particularly hazardous by environmental working groups. So a new roundup of tests, or a new, I said roundup like Roundup weed killer, a new round of tests from the nonprofit Environmental Working Group found that the presence of the weed killer is in breakfast foods like Cheerios and Quaker oat products. The chemical in question, known as glyphosate, has been tentatively linked to cancer. And so, though many scientists argue that the evidence isn't conclusive, the report said that all but 2 of the 28 samples showed harmful levels of glyphosate, but the safety threshold the group uses is far more stringent than the environmental or EPA agency's standards. So as the scientific community awaits further research, consumers are left to decide whether the products pose a risk. So 10 weeks after the nonprofit Environmental Working Group published a report that found the presence of the weed killer in breakfast foods, a new round of tests is likely to generate additional concerns. So in August, the EWG said it discovered traces of glyphosate, the most widely used agricultural pesticide around in the world, in dozens of Quaker, Kellogg's, General Mills, and they sell that all over the grocery stores and Food for Less in California and Ralph's, Vons. All these major grocery stores will sell Quaker Oats and Kellogg's and General Mills products, including cereals like Cheerios and Lucky Charms. So the timing of the report aligned closely with a $289 million lawsuit against Monsanto recently acquired by Bayer, so which uses glyphosate as the active ingredient in its popular herbicide Roundup weed killer. On Monday, a judge denied the company's motion for a new trial after ruling that Monsanto knew its product was dangerous and could lead to cancer or carcinogenic. It had carcinogenic ingredients. So the EWG said that in its August report, that it tested levels of glyphosate in 45 samples of conventionally grown oats, determined that 31 fell below its safety criterion. So its latest study tested another 28 samples, focusing exclusively on Cheerios and Quaker Oat products, and found that all but 2 showed harmful levels of glyphosate according to its measures. But we don't yet know whether glyphosate is actually linked to cancer, is what they say. But the worry and the fear is still out there, of course. So as it stands, most published research has found that glyphosate isn't a health threat at the low levels that consumers are exposed to. Does glyphosate cause cancer? Certain scientific groups have insisted there is a link between glyphosate and cancer, but others aren't convinced just yet. So organizations such as the EPA, the European Commission, Canada's Pest Management Regulatory Agency, and the World Health Organization International Program on Chemical Safety have determined glyphosate does not present a public health concern, as of yet at least. Much of the argument surrounding glyphosate boils down to a report published by WHO's International Agency for Research on Cancer that said that herbicide was probably carcinogenic in humans, but an extensive review of the material by Reuters found that the IARC had edited parts of the document that didn't align with its conclusion. It's almost like they're trying to hide things from the public because they don't want people to fret and worry when you have something to legitimately worry about. We see what it did to Dwayne Johnson, the guy that had the lawsuit against them when the Roundup weed killer was doused on him, and all his skin is peeling and he has lymphoma. So While the scientists have backed away from the IARC's findings, others are doubling down. Okay, so Alex Liu, an associate professor of environmental exposure biology at Harvard, described the IARC as a word renowned or renowned and reputable institution whose findings have benefited global cancer researchers, having conducted his own research of pesticides in children's diets. Liu said that he believed that EWG's safety measures were relatively conservative, that its threshold is too high. And so this is especially true for parents buying breakfast cereals for their infants and children, said Liu, who is not affiliated with EWG, though it has covered his findings in the past. So the EWG considers any cereal with glyphosate level of more than 160 parts per million to be unsafe. So there's back and forth fighting over who's telling the truth and who's not telling the truth, and pointing fingers at one another is what it sounds like as well. And so what is also to be said as the legal limit for oats as outlined by the EPA is 30 parts per million, which is 30,000 parts per million for adults, making EWG's threshold nearly 188 times stringent as the EPA regulations, though it's common to enforce stricter limits for children. Okay. So now they tell people this after the fact, after this whole thing has come out and all these lawsuits about this Monsanto's. So since children have increased susceptibility to cancer-causing substances, it's standard scientific practice to include a 10-fold margin of safety, said that Tasha Stober, a senior scientist at the EWG, are Cheerios safe to eat? So in the wake of EWG's findings in August, both General Mills and Quaker insisted their products are safe. Of course, because they don't want to lose money and they don't want to be in the lawsuit, but they have been named in there. So the companies released statements to Fast Company citing their compliance with they meet regulatory safety levels. General Mills said, okay, they're going to say that because they don't want to get sued. Or they don't want people to stop buying their products and panic, and then they lose money. And so I'm just being honest. So once the oats are transported to us, we put them through our rigorous process. Yeah, right. They do the same thing they've been doing for year after year in and year out. Whatever they were doing before they learned of this, they're doing the same thing. That doesn't make it safe. They just say it's safe because they do whatever they've been doing, but we don't know. They don't know how much of the stuff is in the foods. All they know is what they've been doing, and they just sell the food, and that's it. So any levels of glyphosate that may remain in are significantly below the regulatory limits. But it still warrants the question that the EPA standards if they're up to par. Exactly. So in 2017, a study published in the Journal of Epidemiology and Public Health argued that it could be time to reassess our criteria. So it found enough evidence to suggest that the existing EPA safety standards for glyphosate is outdated and may fail to protect public health or the environment. Exactly. And so the EWG said that in its report this week that the EPA standards for pesticides and other chemicals are also heavily influenced by lobbying and from the industry as well. And so despite these claims, there's still not enough data to conclusively determine its risk. For this reason, Liu said people might want to limit the exposure of glyphosate as a precautionary measure. Now, see, they're warning people, but they're not wanting you to panic, and they don't want to send a frenzy of panic, but people should worry because years and years of eating something and you don't know what's in it and they don't know what's in it. All they know is they sell it to people. They've made money after decades and decades, and now they find this finding since somebody comes forward and speaks out on it. And so they're afraid they're going to lose their money or get sued. And so those worried about safety from their breakfast foods should consider the EWG as to say what they have to say about individual foods. Uh, 28 new samples, the group found that Quaker Oatmeal Square cereal showed the highest level of glyphosate, nearly 18 times as it has in the safety thresholds. The other foods that stood out particularly hazardous by report standards is Quaker overnight oats, Cheerios oat crunch cinnamon flavor, but even those foods would it's possible that new research could shed light on EWG's warnings. Even studies that once seemed definitive have been called into question. So the U.S. Department of Health and Human Service recently determined that after decades of being labeled a carcinogen, a zero-calorie sweetener has called saccharin is not enough to cause cancer, because there was a sugar sweeteners that people will use if they're diabetic or if they're trying to stay away from too much sugar. If people are trying to lay off the sugar, they try to use sugar substitutes, and so that was called into question. Is the saccharin that is in these, sugar substitutes, and so also it's also possible that scientists could uncover new safety concerns for crops like wheat, barley, beans, chickpeas, which are exposed to glyphosate as well before the harvest. And so that was the other article. And it talks about this is pretty serious because this could affect everyone here in the US, especially because I've seen a lot of people just give their kids this cereal because nobody, if people knew that this had some kind of possible health risk, they wouldn't be giving their kids this. They felt like this food is the safest food, is the healthiest food. It's been promoted on commercials that it helps you to lose weight. It has less sugar. It's more fiber. It's good for you. And so what do you expect people to do? And yeah, people are going to panic because if that's what they're eating and you're not sure if it's safe, then they don't believe you anymore. They don't have any trust in you. And so the other article is about the EWG's News Roundup 1026, which is October 26th, more kids' foods with Monsanto Roundup eating. This is the EWG. And so let's look at this. Know your environment and protect your health. EWG. Okay, it's coming straight from them. And so they have to report on this. Okay, so eating organic helps prevent cancer and more. Okay, that's what they claim. But if Monsanto is in it, that's the opposite. More kids' foods with Monsanto's Roundup, eating organic helps prevent cancer and more. Okay, by Robert Coleman, project manager. Okay, this is in the news. Friday, October 26, 2018. This week's EWG released a second round of tests that found the active ingredient Monsanto Roundup glyphosate in popular oat-based cereals and snack marketed cereals to children. All 28 Cheerio and Quaker brand samples tested positive for toxic herbicide. EWG sent letters to the CEOs, PepsiCo, General Mills, which is Pepsi Company, General Mills Company, and respectively the makers of Cheerio and Quaker Oat brands, respectively, demanding that they remove oat sprayed with glyphosate from their supply chains. How many bowls of cereal and oats have American kids eaten that came with a dose of the weed killer? That's the question, okay? And so this is really serious. That's a question only General Mills, PepsiCo, and other food companies can answer. So the EWG president can cook, but he said this is what he has stated. But if those companies would just switch to oats that aren't sprayed with glyphosate, parents wouldn't have to wonder if their kids' breakfast contain a chemical linked to cancer. So glyphosate and other cancer-causing chemicals simply don't belong in children's food, period. Over on our children's health site, we put these new test results into perspective for concerned parents. So the EWG also broke down a groundbreaking study published in American Medical Association journals this week that found that those who adopt an organic diet have seen a greatly reduced risk of cancer compared to those who don't. So it does work to change your food diets to healthier foods, but the concern is what are in even the healthier foods as well as the bad foods. So the study conducted by a French researcher found that over 40 years, the subjects who adopted organic diets were 25% less likely to develop cancer. And in wake of the news over the summer that Trump's EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, was dragging its feet on banning asbestos outright imports of toxic building materials that have exploded increasingly by nearly 2,000% between July and August. So finally, with Halloween fastly approaching, EWG picked 10 treats parents can feel less guilty about handing out to kiddos during the trick-or-treat time. So here's some of the news that you can use going into the weekend. Second round of glyphosate testing. So ABC News EPA says no health risks from the trace amounts of herbicide in breakfast cereal. But how many times have we heard, don't worry, and this, that, and the other? They say this because they don't want mass hysteria and panic. I would be precautious about what's in the foods, because you don't know what these people are, if they're telling the truth. Now that we know that some people actually have developed cancer behind this poison, Monsanto. So the environmental advocacy group reports it has found small amounts or traces of herbicide in consumer foods, including breakfast cereal, saying there is a cause for concern, which it is. Even though the amount is within limits allowed by the EPA, just how much, if any, of the herbicide can be considered safe if matter of long running, let's say you're always eating that food. Okay, so long running scientific and legal debate are over this whole issue. So the what EWG is Environmental Working Group standards for what's acceptable is by far the most conservative, reprinted by 14 media outlets. So it goes on to say the latest test by the Environmental Working Group detected glyphosate in all 28 samples of products made conventionally grown oats, but all the two of the 28 samples had levels of glyphosate above the environmental working group health benchmark, 160 parts per billion. Per billion. So this was reprinted 17 in 17 media outlets. And so this is the big issue that they're talking about, is the weed killer that they found. So it's cancer-linked chemical that is found in breakfast items. And so dozens of common breakfast cereals and snack bars have trace amounts of the controversial herbicide found in weed killer Roundup, according to the report that was released today by the Environmental Advocacy Group. So the EWG, which is Environmental Working Group, found 26 of 28 products that it had tested had levels of Roundup, Monsanto's weed Roundup killer, main ingredient glyphosate, that were higher than the EWG scientists considered protective of children's health. So the earlier report found similar results in over 30 oat-based foods. So CNN Wire story reprinted this. 147 media outlets have this now. And so this is what is going on. So people should be aware of this. It's like if you're putting something that can kill millions of people or can cause millions of people cancer, then people want to know what the hell this is. They're not going to listen to you saying, oh, it's just a small amount. It's like saying, here, you only have a small amount of cyanide in your bowl of noodles, so it won't kill you. Anything that is poisonous, cancerous, that is something that can cause death to humans, I don't care if it's a small amount or a big amount, it's dangerous. And if you're doing a small amount in small doses, eventually it will catch up to you. If you're doing a big whopping amount of it, it's still going to get you. So either way, it doesn't matter if it's a small amount or traces. After years and years of eating that cereal, you don't think it can't cause some type of damage? Yes, it can. So it goes on to say the Environmental Working Group, it's found 26 out of 28 products tested had glyphosate or a main chemical herbicide found in Roundup above the group's benchmark. All samples, according to the EWG, tested positive for glyphosate, but 2 were under the 160 part per billion limit set by EWG. And so that was reprinted 28 in 28 media outlets. So a report of the Environmental Working Group found 26 of 28 cereal, snack bars, oat products it tested had traces amounts of herbicide found in a weed killer. Okay, and this is the second round of tests EWG has done, and that's been reprinted 24 other media outlets. Fox News also talks about the popular breakfast foods that contain the active ingredient of Roundup weed killer, and that study finds that at least 28 samples of popular oat-based cereals and snack bars made by popular household names General Mills and Quaker, which when you walk in Ralph's, what is in the shelves? All over the shelves, General Mills and Quaker oats contain glyphosate and active ingredients used in Monsanto weed killer Roundup. Environmental Working Group's EWG discovered in a new study released this week, reprinted in New York Post and 16 other media outlets. So EWG's, which is Environmental Working Group, said Thursday 26 of 28 products is tested contain trace amounts of weed killer. And so that was also reprinted in NBC 4, Columbus, Ohio, ABC 27, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and 5 other media outlets. And so Business Insider as well has it. All over the place, they're talking about this. And so if you are living under a rock, you wouldn't know about this, but you need to wake up and smell the coffee, because 10 weeks after the Environmental Working Group published a report that found the presence of weed killer in breakfast foods, a new round of tests is likely to generate additional concerns. Okay, so this is serious. So nonprofit organizations, Environmental Working Group, EWG, claims the trace amounts of the common weed killer were found in 28 samples of oat-based cereals. And Mike reports the EWG published a preliminary report this past August that revealed traces of weed Roundup killer in the common breakfast food and snack bars. Current report now confirms this. And so this is basically telling you that it has gotten and circulated all over these news media outlets, all over, in dozens of cereals, oatmeals, snack bars contain traces of the weed killer that has been linked to cancer, a new report says, released to Environmental Working Group. The report found that, and it goes over and over it again. So glyphosate, the main ingredient in Roundup, was found 26 of the 28 products Environmental Working Group tested in levels higher than the EWG scientists considered protective of children's health. So glyphosate's the active ingredient in Monsanto Roundup weed killer was found in all 28 samples of different cereals, oatmeal, and snack bars tested in the lab in the Environmental Working Group, according to the report released today. And so this is the big concern. And so it's out there and people need to know about it. And if they think that you're not reading and you're too busy worrying about migrants, a caravan of migrant people coming here, or people stealing your money, and here you're eating this cereal every day and you've been eating it for the last 40 years. These are things they think you're not going to look at, and you're not going to pay attention to, but you could probably be a victim of this weed killer. No, my videos are real. I talk about real stuff, real shit that's happening out there. And so this is very serious, and I don't know why they are just now telling people, and I believe they already knew this was happening. They just didn't want to create the hysteria and the frenzy about this Roundup weed killer that is pretty much out there for anybody to access, and you don't know how much of this you've been eating. If this is your everyday diet, if you're eating checked, giving your baby checked cereal, and you're giving your baby oatmeal, and you're giving your baby, because we're organic, we're trying to be healthy, and I understand that. But if this product is in there and you're eating this every day, you gotta wonder if you have anything having to do with cancer or some health issues that you are developing, and you're wondering how this happened, and you're thinking, oh, maybe it's hereditary, or maybe it was something I ate. Bingo, might have been something you ate. You might want to look into this. Anyway, with that being said, I'm going to let this video go. So this is pretty serious. Anybody want to access these articles, just go ahead. It's called Know Your Environment, Protect Your Health, EWG, which is coined as the Environmental Working Group. Okay, and the EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency. Know the foods that you're eating and where it is coming from. And so it isn't just about losing weight and looking sexy. It's about knowing what you're putting in your body. And so if you're putting something in your body you would appear or think that would be healthy, know where it is coming from and where it's being grown at, and what other chemicals could be sprayed on it possibly. And so here you have it. The world's supposed to be superfood, wheat and grains and all the vegetables and stuff are stricken by these weed killer sprays that people now are fighting in court for money and compensation for ending up with cancer behind it. With that, having said that, I'm going to let this video go, and this is a big story, and I think it's ever developing. All we can ask is, what other foods outside of the cereal could this be in? That's the big question. Thanks for listening.